Shane Cassells is indicated as the first speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And can I welcome Mr. Cody this morning, and at the outset can I pay tribute to him and indeed all of his staff for the work that they do and the contribution that they make to the state as well. And can I also thank the CNAG and of course all his staff for their consistent work on behalf of this committee also. I suppose with so much focus over the last couple of days on expenditure in this state, it's probably extremely opportune that you are here this morning as we look at the income side, because I suppose despite gross receipts collected last year by the revenue of some 62 billion, when you listen to the deputies making statements here in the House over the last couple of days, and you add up the many multiples that they would see on their wish lists, we could do with you bring maybe in a few more euro as well. So maybe you could find that for us. Mr. Cody, if we could speak, I suppose, to the revenue accounts and the appropriation accounts before we move to the chapters on fuel laundering and compliance. I know that from our role as political representatives, one of the consistent items that we would deal with would be the pressures on small and medium businesses. It's always spoken of, and one of the items that struck me from the figures was the issue of managing taxpayer debt. Because at the end of 2015 there was approximately 8,500 taxpayers or businesses covering almost €96 million of tax debt who had phased payment arrangements to enable them overcome significant cash flow problems. Given that only €96 million of the debt available for collection of the €823 million had phased payment arrangements in place, is there not scope to increase the level of such arrangements so that more businesses could be helped? And when you see 8,500 covering 96 million, could you maybe explain to me how many businesses are covered in the remaining €727 million? And I know any small business person you would talk to would speak about the operating pressures that they are under. I know when they say they're hit with their tax bill, it's something that always shakes them to the core. So on that debt side, I'm sure if there is a greater phased arrangement could be put in place to enable them overcome these cash flow problems, it would be hugely significant. If you could just speak to me on that for a moment.
Thank you, Deputy, and thanks for the compliments to the revenue staff. To do a difficult job in difficult circumstances. The issue around debt collection and debt management, I think, there was a comprehensive review of the debt management in the Controller's 2014 report, which we've never had a chance to discuss, but I'm quite happy that we can touch on some of the issues here. And I have up-to-date figures in relation to the phased payment arrangements. As of the 30th of September 2016, that figure is now 11,432, covering 108 million of debt. And what that... Sorry, 11,432, covering 108 million in debt. And what that represents is, at the Controller's report last year, we had 734 million of debt that was neither subject to a payment agreement or any enforcement proceedings. And in last year's budget package, we got additional resources to focus on debt collection. It tends to be at the lower end, the small, not the medium enterprises that we were having difficulty getting to, because obviously there's bigger numbers but smaller money. So we deployed...
Figure of what the kind of average you'd be talking about?
We're talking about a lot of debt, not much more than 5,000 in total.
Small business. Small trade,
yeah. Sole traders, no PAYE, some with small amounts of VAT. So what we focused on, that 734 million, and by September 2016 of that 734 million, 568 of it has been collected. Because the Controller had done this study on the 734, and one of the things we undertook to do is to map those particular debts. So we engage proactively with the businesses, and of those, about 3,500 of them entered into a phased arrangement. So we have increased the numbers under a phased arrangement, but to get involved in a phased arrangement requires two parties to the transaction. So what we require is up-to-date returns, meaningful engagement, and a commitment to keep current returns up to date. So we've of the 734, there's only 43 million of it that we have yet to engage with. So we've done a considerable amount. I think what's really interesting, when around 2012 we had 16,000 cases under phased arrangement when the recession had really hit. It hit obviously in 2008, but by the time the debt had risen up to enforcement stage was about 2012. We had 126 million under phased arrangement in 2012. And some of that reflects the fact that people completed their phased arrangement, the debt is paid, and they're on a steady basis. What we are really keen to do is keep viable businesses in business, keep people in jobs, but it does require engagement by the taxpayer, because the downside, and we'll talk later about tax gap, but part of the tax gap is all about uncollected debt, and that obviously has an implication on viable businesses if their next door neighbour can trade without paying their taxes.
Chairman, if I can just, there's obviously a lot to get through, so I'm just going to jump from section to section. If I can just move to the local property tax, something that's also very live in people's minds. And according to your accounts, you achieved 97% compliance for that tax in 2015. I know there was recent media reports on how revenue would chase the remaining 3% and bring them into the net. Is there an actual cohort of homes you've identified, regional spread? Is there something you can maybe talk to us in that respect in terms of that plan to bring in the 3%? Is it all collectible? Is there always a certain portion of bad debt? And what are your targets going forward for that?
We have reached 97% for this year, which is on target with our previous years. The issue is that obviously we have a target to have 100% collection on everything, but that's not realistic. So there will be an element of bad debt, but also I think there's an issue around the 100% accuracy of the LPT register. The LPT register was built from scratch in 2012-2013. From our analysis of the 3%, I think we're fairly satisfied that about 1.5% of it is duplicate properties, flaws in the register, and that there are properties that are, because of, and I'm sure the committee has spoken about air codes, non-unique addresses and the matching of non-unique addresses in country areas where you have a townsland and you have commonality of names, and so you could have a Patrick Ryan, a PJ Ryan, and they could be the same people. They have two addresses and we have them twice. So
would you have on-the-ground teams actually in those instances? Because obviously, I mean, estates and so forth are very easy to target and so forth. In terms of looking at that, are you deploying on-the-ground teams to actually look at that on a rural area basis?
What we are doing is more using data matching tools, analytical tools. The idea of putting officers on the highways and byways looking and counting the number of houses in Townsland would not be a sensible use of resources. But I think what's really interesting is the census data was published recently. So one of the issues there, while the CSO cannot by law give us details, they actually publish a really wealth of information on the distribution of houses. And what we do is we map census data to our data, and we have some really interesting tools around geographic mapping. So what we can do is we can look at areas essentially at our desk and see, have we got areas that we need to target. The other thing is that the LPT is designed in such a way that while if we don't write to you and you're liable, you're still liable, and that ultimately it remains a charge on the property. So it's one of these taxes that is really hard to avoid. and ultimately it's probably the tax that eventually will have 100% liability. Maybe not.
And so forth, yeah. Just a quick comment.